We are strong. We are proud. We are the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado. We build vibrant communities across the state by investing in our people. By the year 2042, 1 of 3 Coloradans will be of Latino ancestry. We must create opportunity so our children, families, and elders can share their stories, feel connected, and give back at all levels of society to shape an inclusive Colorado. We are your trusted partner, your ambassador for transformative change. Somos familia. Let's create our collective power together. Connect with us at latinocfc.org.
Celebrate with us on October 13, 2022, as we celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado at the Denver Art Museum. Don't miss it.
This is the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado, Our Story series. This series elevates and addresses issues pertinent throughout Latino communities in Colorado and beyond. We believe transformative change is possible when the collective power of the Latino community comes together.
Hello, I'm Carlos Martinez with the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado. The Foundation welcomes you to the Our Story podcast. This final episode, La Lucha, Part 2, shares how community leaders Dr. Lilia Cervantes, Vinnie Cervantes, Patricia Miller, and Tonette Salazar stepped up their leadership to create change in the Latino community locally and statewide, and across multiple sectors. In their own unique way, each has challenged and impacted systems, have fought for equity, and have amplified the voices of the voiceless. Welcome back. Excited to get to the second part of our panel. I have one question before we get into this family discussion. We're all just going to be talking and sharing and asking questions. But how has your culture, your family traditions, your upbringing helped in shaping your leadership style?
Yeah, I was thinking about what I was going to say. I think for me, it has been courage, to be honest. Okay. My family having the courage to come here to Denver, Colorado when she was 39 weeks pregnant with me. Because she wanted me to have U.S. citizenship. And so she was very courageous. She came here on bus with very little money. And for me, I should also mention, actually, one of my role models said, to be a leader in healthcare, you have to have the courage to be fired, to basically, make people angry and leave your job when you're following your moral compass. And, we've all talked about sort of the issues that we hold at heart. And I mentioned the story about Hilda, and I oftentimes thought I was going to be fired when speaking out. So I think courage is one of the values I think that has helped me the most.
Vinnie?
I think one thing that I really took from my family is really practicing empathy and understanding other people's circumstances and things that they've experienced that maybe you don't understand or don't know or have not experienced yourself, and really applying that to how you work with others to create change or to support other people. And that's something that I really got from my family on both sides. So I think that's something that I've really hopefully taken into my leadership style.
Patricia?
I think the first thing that came to my mind was collaboration. And, that unity that you feel in community has been the instrumental part of my leadership style, is obviously Alianza, making those alliances happen and bringing as many people to the table as possible has been really what I base my leadership style on.
Tonette?
For me, it's been a lot about helping others when you have the ability to do so. And whether it's an individual person or a larger group and everything in between. That's really been the force that has kind of led me to do what I do. If I can help in in a policy space, in a legal space, professional space, or even just on a personal space, helping someone pick up children from school. Whatever it takes, if I'm able to do it, I have an obligation to help.
During the break, you all started asking questions of each other, and it's like, how about this, how about that, how about that? So I'm just going to open it up and have you all ask questions of each other around what you heard and so forth. So I'm going to start with you, Lilia, because you had a question for Tonette.
Yes, I did. Tonette, you've been involved in so many different initiatives and have improved the well-being of the Latino community in the entire state and country. And so I was just curious, like, which initiative are you most proud of and why?
It's like asking me to pick my favorite child. But Carlos mentioned the first one, which is in-state tuition for undocumented students or ASSET. And that was one where I think a lot of us learned lessons. It took us 10 years and 7 attempts to introduce legislation before we were finally able to get that passed. And it required a narrative change. It required a lot of education. It required getting different partners to the table to believe in the same solutions that we were seeking. But at the end of the day, that policy changes people's lives. And the students never gave up in all of that time. So we as adults couldn't give up either. And even today, whenever I speak to different groups or other events, I always have at least one person come up to me and say, thank you. I am a recipient of that. I had no idea the history behind it, or someone would say, I recall the effort and the patience we all had to have. And I see so many students who are involved in that policy movement in doing amazing things and successful careers. And knowing that I had a small impact on that is something that I hold very dearly. So I'll pick that favorite child for now.
That's incredible.
And Patricia, you had a question for Vinnie.
Yeah, so Vinnie, I am so impressed with the work that you have done. And I think it is a model for so many places around the country, including Northern Colorado. And so my question was, how do you bring people to the same place to start that change, right, for such a divisive topic?
Yeah. Well, I think on one hand, I mean, we act in a lot of ways in the realm of reform, and even in that realm of scarcity of like, there's only so many things we can do and only so many solutions that are out there that are winnable. But our organization is operated from the sense that, we don't have to accept the system that we exist in. And if we think about this moment of change where we saw the pandemic, we have, national movements that were occurring last year around police violence and around, especially looking into schools. I mean, it directly led to Denver removing their SROs from their schools. We've experienced an incredible moment that should ideally create a new world. And I think it really depends on, if we're to say what happens after a revolution or after a new world, it really depends on the ideas that exist before that happens. And I think it's really important to invest in that work, to talk to the people that have those ideas, that have those demands, and to really bring folks together that have been harmed by that system to say we can do something outside of the system that works better for us, understanding the limitations that we exist in right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question for Patricia and for Vinnie. Just asking, you do so much work with community, and without your work, we wouldn't have the solutions and the voices that we need to change policy. And Lily, your research and advocacy from the professional side of things is incredible. And we all have a piece in the puzzle of trying to change things for our community. But I'm just curious, what are you hearing from your community members about the information, understanding, knowledge that they feel like they need to operate in a policy space more successfully?
I think a lot of times for the community members that I have the privilege to work with in the immigrant community, it's a lot about bringing them along, like understanding what they understand and the places that they've come from, the power that they've had, and then just bringing them with you to those spaces where they haven't been before. And when we did that, we were inspired by the way that they communicated their needs and their aspirations and their dreams, basically doing the work for us, right? And laying the foundation for the change that needed to happen. And so having more of those information sessions, and we did storytelling sessions in which we would sit down with our friends and we would say, okay, what is your story? What do you want to share? And that really worked well.
I think one thing that I'm hearing a lot from the community is this kind of exasperation that they're not being heard, that they've put forward, their own stories, their own solutions for years and decades. And, our own work is built off the decades of work that happened before us. And just not getting a response from political leaders, not feeling heard by political leaders, a different level of access for people in our community that, that they don't have to people that are in positions to make real change today if they wanted to. And so, I think one thing that people are sick of it. They're just kind of, trying to survive at this point. It's really kind of what they're focused on right now. And I think a lot of people are focused on that. And so, to the extent that they could be more involved or more engaged in the political world, in the policy world, it's about organizations providing that vehicle that they can be heard, that they can create change. And I think that's really important work that you're doing, and need to see more of it, because we have elected officials right now that, a lot of them are just not listening to folks. And that's a really big problem.
Yeah. And if I may add, I think also when we think about achieving equity, specifically health equity, what my work does is really sort of bring patients to the table, but not just the table, but the head of the table, to ask them, like, how can we reduce the prevalence of diabetes? How can we begin to help individuals understand that they're at risk for kidney disease? And they're the ones that are thinking about the different solutions, the community-based solutions. And so the other thought I had is really making sure that information is bidirectional, because I think oftentimes as clinicians and as researchers, we tend to own all that information. And oftentimes I think that the community needs to own that information so that they know what the prevalence is of depression or diabetes. And then they can, be the ones to say, I want to do this project, instead of us bringing, these research and analyses to the community. They need to be the ones leading that work.
What I love about the research part of it and how people take that is that it takes that feeling of being alone and being the only one, stepping up for your family or dealing with that health concern. You are not alone. There are a lot of other people who are doing those things. Seeing the numbers makes that crystal clear and gives you that chispa that we all need to step forward to make that change.
Vinnie, do you have a question
Yeah.
you want to bring to the table?
Yeah, this is open to everyone, because I think that you're all doing work that is pretty critical to this question. I've been part of so many organizations where I feel like when we put demands forward, there's a compromise built into those demands. If we say, this is what we think we can win now, that is best worth our energy and our effort, our resources. But even in the organizations I've been part of and other organizations that, I've known of, putting forward those demands and compromising some of those things out front limits what can actually happen as a result of those demands and the change that we're trying to create. So we're founded as DASHR saying, we don't have to concede anything on our demands. We can put exactly what we want to see in the world and then work from there. So for you all, where does that moment of compromise happen, where you value both the place that you're standing to say, we're not going to move on this issue, we're not going to move on this one thing, versus we need to move the issue forward and here's the compromise that we make. So where does compromise become really critical in your own work?
We had to compromise on the legal defense fund in Fort Collins. There was a 1-year residency requirement that got introduced at the last minute. And one of the council members was really set on that 1-year residency requirement. And we had to decide whether we were going to concede at that moment, and knowing the pros and cons of what that was going to mean to our community, especially of recently arrived immigrants who weren't going to be able to meet that requirement, versus not having an immigration legal defense fund at all. And so we decided that it was going to be the first thing that we were going to hit on our next round of advocacy, right? And decided that it was going to be a hit that we had to take. But it's always so difficult, especially because you know that it could mean the difference between someone staying and having to head back home.
In the Capitol, it all depends on political will and who's elected and how important is the issue to their respective constituents. When people like you all do amazing community work and really elevate the conversation and the issue, it infiltrates into the Capitol and makes the compromise a little bit easier or less necessary, I would say. But when there isn't that level of groundwork, when it's just a little more hearsay, if there isn't as much data, it makes the job that much harder. And I do talk with groups about, you have to decide for yourself, when is a win no longer a win? And you have to know what that line is for you, and you have to be ready to walk away and know what the consequences are. It might mean you can't bring the issue up for 2 years. It might mean some people aren't going to get sent home. And it's knowing where that line is and being comfortable with it. So that way, when that decision comes before you, you know where you stand instead of having to panic and try to figure out where you might be for that. And when I know that and others know that, we know where that line is. And we make sure that we do everything we can to protect that and keep the values intact with the policy that we're trying to pass. But sometimes you have to be willing to walk away. And that's difficult because it's not defeat. It's just, we're going to regroup and we'll come back stronger because we don't like the way this feels right now and it won't happen again.
I like that.
So thank you. So a couple other questions that I have is, and I've seen this with myself, how my leadership has evolved over the decades. And a lot of that has been a result of how our society has changed. And I continue to learn new ways of thinking things through and how to best lead as society has changed. What have you seen within your respective fields about the leadership and how has your leadership changed? And where do you see the Latino community needs to take its leadership to really help do some transformative change at the local level?
I would say you asked about the local level, but at the state level, I'll start there. We're starting to see some real transformation. We're having greater numbers of elected officials be elected. We have Latinos in leadership. We have Latinos in committee chair positions. That makes a difference in the conversations, in the decisions that are being made. And so the changes in that aspect allow me to do a better job advocating for groups like this to make those policy changes. But it hasn't always been like that. When you have people who don't expect you to be there and have statements directed towards you, like, I have a hard time being lobbied by you knowing someone else is watching your children. You should be home with them. And you have to work with that person every single day because they have a vote. Or when they say things like, we should put everybody on a bus and round them up and send them back. You have to work with that person every single day. And so my younger me with the quick tongue had to learn how to turn the other cheek, figure out where that person was coming from, and learn how to work with them. Because sometimes they're going to be with you and sometimes they're not. And you can't ever take anything personally. But it can be a tough pill to swallow.
I think that for the local level, one of the things we've had to do is a lot of education for our local leaders and council members. And I think it's education that they haven't received in the past. One of the council members who didn't end up going with our proposal, he actually said, this is the best lobbying session, which we don't set out to lobby, right? We set out to educate. This is the best lobbying session I've ever been to, and I expect to see some of you running for office in the next few years. And it's because we had gotten a large enough group with diverse and unique voices to come and teach him about the things that are happening in our community. And when you don't have local Latino leaders that are doing that work, it's on you to educate the white people who are in power. And that's been a learning experience, that they're not going to have the information you need them to have.
And I would just add to it that in the last couple of years since COVID, I think many of us have been just motivated by anger because the number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths in the Latino community has more than doubled the percent that they populate in Denver County. And I know it's a little bit different throughout the state, but we have seen such a disproportionate burden of COVID on our Latino community that I think many of us just feel angry to be more involved. And for those of you in healthcare, I think it's important to be involved because we have a unique lens. We're able to sort of see how illness and the social challenges come together. Many of you have heard the, description of social determinants of health. And when we think about the social determinants of health, there are neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, Valverde, where, it was redlined in the past. There are less grocery stores, more pollution, there's highways near it. And so, you think about the lived experiences of individuals and how that impacts their ability to live a long life. The Valverde neighborhood where I grew up in has a life expectancy that's 6 years less than Wash Park, which is a neighborhood that's just a handful of miles away. And so I think, for those of you that are clinicians out there, if you can be involved in any way in thinking about the health of your communities, now is the time.
Yeah, I think the pandemic is a great segue, to kind of what I was going to say. We're still experiencing it, but came to our communities last year with the global pandemic that is not only creating disproportionate death in our Latino communities, but also creating increases in substance use issues and mental health crises. And we're facing now an eviction crisis that's going to increase with homelessness. And so these are also things that are disproportionately impacting our Latino community. And in the same kind of time frame, having this national uprising around really naming that, maybe police shouldn't be the catch-all response for all these issues that are increasing as a result of the pandemic, has provided this environment where these conversations are happening in a way that's really making space for envisioning a new way to approach these issues in a new world in general, and in a way that's opening people up to looking how this is being experienced in our own backyards. Again, we see these names come across from other states across the country, but these are people that are also being hurt in our own communities. And so really making that environment to make the things that we've been working for years a reality is an incredible moment, but one that's also challenging.
So Vinnie and Lilia, you talked about COVID and how that has changed how we see the inequities, the kind of work that we need to do as a community to be able to address some of these inequities. So we have hundreds of people watching us. So how would you like Latinos to step up their leadership? If you could just wave that magic wand and say, this is how I would love Latinos to step up, what would you say to all the folks watching us today about how you would like them to step up their leadership?
I guess just really making an effort to make the connections with other Latino-led organizations and other Latinos across the state. Maybe there's a foundation that helps in that, but I think that's a big part of it, is that we really need to come together because, especially in my work, we see a lot of different organizations that are more resourced than us, that are not led by our community, taking over that work. And it would really help at least our work if there's more of our organizations coming together that can also address a more full spectrum approach to these issues. It's not just the moment of crisis, but the basic human needs that are met, the community empowerment that happens, and restoration that happens after crisis occurs. But there are organizations that are doing that are led by our community, and if we're all working together, it makes a better overall approach to addressing those issues.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I would also add to people who are out there watching who don't feel like they are the voice or that they can represent their community in ways that are authentic, because maybe they have too much privilege now. Maybe they have been here for a length of time that has allowed them to be successful, right? And they think that that's not a space that they want to step into because it's scary or unknown. But they have that call inside of their heart saying, I can do more, or I can represent. Do it. Step into the ring and fight this lucha with us, because that's the only way that this full spectrum of our community is going to come forward, right? Okay. With you coming forward as a medical expert, a policy expert, bringing your experience, Vinnie, and me coming from tech, like a space that is so foreign from the outside, but actually so close to immigrant issues once you're on the inside. Mm-hmm. If you work at a restaurant, you work with immigrants, you can be that voice, whether or not you are an immigrant, whether or not you are Latino even.
And I would just add to that to reflect on your chispa. What is it that keeps you up at night? What is it that makes you angry? And don't leave it for the next day. Realize that there are others that might feel the same way. As a clinician, I didn't think that change was possible at all. And it wasn't until I started doing research in this area and partnering with community and other stakeholders that I realized, oh my goodness, I am not in this alone. There's this whole group of people that are willing to help me strategize and change policy. And when we changed policy, it helped me realize, oh my goodness, this is possible. Yeah. And so find that chispa and realize that it is possible to create change.
I would just say that data is on our side, numbers are on our side. Latinos are prominent in Colorado. We have a window of opportunity, unfortunately, because of COVID, but a lot of inequities that have existed for decades in the Latino community are now being raised up in housing, in education, in healthcare. And so we have a window and an obligation to step forward and do something about it, regardless of what your position might be. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody can have an impact. And just sitting around the table with all of you, we've been able to talk about the impact collectively we can do if we bring all the other organizations and individuals together who might be watching this or who maybe aren't. We have a powerful movement in place that we can continue for decades to come, but we need a lot more people to come alongside us.
So unfortunately, we're running out of time for this segment. We will have an opportunity to enter into a community dialogue a little bit later on. But as we end this piece, what one word of advice or what sentence of advice would you want to share with folks watching us today about their chispa or their leadership, or just one quick word or one quick sentence of advice?
I would say, don't lose your soul in this fight. Remember where you came from. I was with my family this past weekend, and I remembered separating the rocks from the beans when I was little. So just remember where you came from.
I would say that, right now we exist in a world that is dictated a lot by systems of violence, of racism, of oppression. And the world that we create tomorrow will have those systems die. The systems that are governing our today will die in that world that we build tomorrow. And to echo what some other folks have said about, we all have a role to play in building that world. So, start doing it.
And I'll just follow up with a book that I read about police brutality, actually. And it talked all about how you can't just be focused on your fight today. You have to be actively creating the world that you want to live on tomorrow, right? And I really echo that. And also, many of us came into this work because we felt angry about what was happening. But for me and for many, we stayed in this work because of the love that we feel for those relationships that we've built, the stories that we have been able to be a part of. And so connect to either your love or your anger, but stay in it.
Well, to piggyback on what you're saying, this is a long game. There's not going to be instant change. These systems have been around for a very long time, and it's going to take time to undo them. So we're not going to see a silver bullet or a quick fix, but we're persistent people with a lot of talent and energy. And so we're in it for the long game, but things don't always have to be the way they are right now.
Well, big thanks to our panelists for sharing their stories, sharing their chispa, sharing their lucha, and how all of that leads to liberated action. This podcast was brought to you by the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado. Thank you for joining us today for the Our Story podcast, where Latinos' lived experiences meets action. This series was made possible through the support of the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, the Colorado Health Foundation, Molson Coors, and the University of Colorado. Production credits to Emmy-winning producers, Truce Media Collective. To learn more about the work of the Latino Community Foundation of Colorado, visit us at latinocfc.org. If you liked what you heard today, consider supporting the Our Story podcast through a donation so that we may continue producing Latino-focused, Latino-informed programming that advances our narrative. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at LatinoCFC. We hope you have enjoyed this journey, and most of all, we hope you have enjoyed being in community with us these past several episodes. Joining us next year as we continue to elevate and address issues pertinent to the statewide Latino community in Colorado and beyond through the Our Story podcast.